After the wedding photo shoot, I received a flash drive with photos. Opened it and just froze. Instead of our photos, there were pictures from an explicit photo shoot of my wife with my best friend. I pretended that I did not know about it. But then right during the wedding, I turned on the projector and showed it in front of everyone. So here I am, 28 years old, fixing broken phones and tablets at a little repair shop in Austin, Texas. Name's Eric. And up until 6 months ago, I thought I had my life pretty much figured out. I was dating Amanda for 4 years, and let me tell you, this girl was everything you'd want in a partner. Bubbly, social, the kind of person who could make friends with a brick wall if she tried hard enough. My parents absolutely loved her, always dropping hints about when I was going to pop the question. Now, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I know a good thing when I see it. Amanda had this laugh that could light up a whole restaurant, and she genuinely seemed to care about everyone around her. She'd remember my co-worker's birthday, bring homemade cookies to family gatherings, and even help my mom set up her new smartphone without getting frustrated once. Yeah, I was head over heels, and honestly, who wouldn't be? Fast forward to last spring, and I finally worked up the courage to propose. Nothing fancy, just me, her, and a ring I'd been saving up for since Christmas. We were at our favorite taco place downtown, the one with those awful plastic chairs that somehow made the best carnitas in Austin. She said yes, obviously, and we started planning what we thought would be the wedding of our dreams. Here's where things get interesting, and trust me, you're going to want to hear this part. When it came time to pick a wedding photographer, I did what any normal person would do. I asked around. My buddy Jake from work had used this local guy for his wedding last year and couldn't stop raving about him. Then my neighbor mentioned the same photographer, saying he'd done amazing work for his daughter's wedding. Even the lady at the coffee shop I go to every morning brought him up when she overheard me talking about wedding plans. So I'm thinking, okay, this guy must be something special if everyone's singing his praises. I mean, in a city like Austin, you got photographers coming out of your ears, but everyone kept mentioning this one dude. His name was Marcus, had a studio downtown, and his portfolio looked pretty solid online. Nothing too artsy or weird, just clean, professional shots that actually looked like the people in them were having a good time. I brought up to Amanda one evening while we were binge-watching some Netflix show about serial killers. Don't judge. We all have our guilty pleasures. Anyway, I mentioned Marcus, showed her his website on my laptop, and that's when things got a little strange. Amanda, who'd been excited about every single wedding detail up to that point, suddenly got this weird look on her face. She started scrolling through his photos really slowly, like she was studying them for some kind of hidden message. Then she closes a laptop and gives me this forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She suggests we should probably look at more options, maybe get quotes from different photographers, shop around a bit more, which was weird because Amanda was usually the type to make decisions fast and stick with them. But I was already sold on this guy. I mean, when 3 different people who don't even know each other all recommend the same photographer, that's got to mean something, right? Plus, his prices were reasonable, and he had availability for our date. In my mind, it was a done deal. I told Amanda we should book him before someone else snatched up our weekend. That's when she got a little more insistent. She started bringing up all these concerns that seemed to come out of nowhere. What if his style doesn't match our vision? What if he's not good with candid shots? What if he's one of those photographers who takes forever to deliver the final photos? I'm sitting there thinking, where is this coming from? 5 minutes ago, you were perfectly fine with his work. But you know how it is when you think you found a perfect solution to a problem. I wasn't about to let some random doubts derail what seemed like an obvious choice. I pushed back, maybe a little harder than I should have. I told her that sometimes you just gotta trust the process, trust the recommendations from people whose judgment we respected. I even threw in that thing about not fixing what isn't broken, which in hindsight was probably not the best choice of words. Amanda eventually gave in, but not in the way someone does when they're convinced you're right. It was more like when you're too tired to keep arguing about where to go for dinner. So you just agree to pizza, even though you were craving Chinese food. She nodded, said okay, and immediately changed the subject to flower arrangements. I should have picked up on that red flag, but honestly, wedding planning makes everyone a little crazy, so I just chalked it up to stress. We booked Marcus for the wedding, and I felt pretty good about myself. I'd done my research, listened to recommendations, and made a solid choice that would give us beautiful memories to look back on. Amanda seemed to relax once it was settled, and we moved on to the million other decisions you have to make when you're planning a wedding. Venue, catering, music, all that stuff that somehow costs 3 times more than it should just because you add the word wedding in front of it. Looking back now, I realize Amanda wasn't being difficult or indecisive about the photographer choice. She was trying to protect herself, trying to steer us away from what she knew could be a disaster. But I was too focused on checking items off our wedding planning list and notice that my future wife was practically breaking into a cold sweat every time Marcus's name came up in conversation. If I'd been paying attention, really paying attention, I might have asked more questions. I might have wondered why someone who had opinions about everything from napkin colors to the font on our invitations suddenly had nothing to say about the person who'd be capturing the most important day of our lives. But I didn't ask those questions, and that decision set everything that happened next into motion. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just gone with a gut feeling and picked a different photographer. Would we be married right now? Would I still be living in ignorant bliss? But then again, maybe some truths are too big to stay hidden forever, and Marcus just happened to be the messenger I never saw coming. A couple days before the wedding, Marcus dropped off our USB drive with what was supposed to be our engagement photos from last month. You know, those cheesy couple shots that every bride insists on having. Us laughing on some bridge downtown, holding hands in park. That whole romantic portfolio thing that costs way more than it should, but makes everyone happy. I was actually excited to see them. Amanda had been talking about these photos nonstop since we did the shoot, going on about how Marcus had this amazing eye for capturing natural moments. She kept saying we'd probably want to use some of them for our wedding slideshow, or maybe frame a few for the house we were planning to buy after the honeymoon. So there I was, plugging in a USB drive after work, expecting to see a bunch of pictures that would make me look like the luckiest guy in Austin. The main folder was labeled exactly what you'd expect. Eric and Amanda engagement session, with about 40 photos of us being disgustingly cute together. Amanda looking gorgeous in that blue dress she'd bought specifically for the shoot. Me trying not to look too awkward in front of the camera. But here's where things got weird. While I was scrolling through the folder structure, I noticed there was another folder on the drive. No label, just some random string of numbers and letters that looked like the camera had automatically generated it. Probably just backup files or test shots, I figured, but you know how it is when you're curious about something, you just have to look. I clicked on that mystery folder, and my whole world collapsed in about 3 seconds flat. There was Amanda, clear as day, but she definitely wasn't with me in these photos. She was with Kevin, my best man, the guy I'd known since high school, the guy who was supposed to stand next to me in 2 days and hand me the rings. At first, I thought maybe these were old photos from before Amanda and I got together. Maybe some random coincidence from years ago that somehow ended up on our photographer's memory card. But then I started really looking at the details, and everything about that theory fell apart faster than a house of cards in a tornado. Amanda was wearing this red dress I'd never seen before, something expensive looking that definitely wasn't in her closet when I left for work that morning. Her hair was different too, styled in a way that took time and planning. These weren't spontaneous snapshots or accidental photos. This was a full professional session with lighting, poses, the whole production. The photos started innocent enough. Kevin and Amanda holding hands, looking at each other like they shared some amazing secret. Then they got progressively more intimate. Amanda sitting on Kevin's lap on what looked like a studio couch. Kevin's hands on her waist, her shoulder, touching her in ways that made it crystal clear this wasn't some platonic friendship photo shoot. Then I saw the timestamp in the corner of the images, and that's when my stomach dropped so hard I thought I might actually throw up right there at my kitchen table. These photos weren't from years ago or some random coincidence from the distant past. The date stamp read 3 days before our wedding. 3 days. While I'd been running around town picking up my tuxedo, confirming details of the caterer, and making sure everything was perfect for what I thought would be the best day of my life, my future wife and my best friend were having what looked like the most romantic photo session in the history of photography. I kept scrolling through the images, and they got worse with every click. Amanda in her underwear, Kevin shirtless, both of them looking completely comfortable with the whole situation. These weren't awkward poses or hesitant expressions. They looked like two people who had done this before, who knew each other's bodies, who had a level of intimacy that should have been reserved for married couples. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the mouse, but I couldn't stop looking. Photo after photo of betrayal, each one time-stamped with dates that proved this had been going on right under my nose. The worst part wasn't even the physical intimacy. It was the way they looked at each other. Pure happiness, like they'd found something perfect together. I started thinking about Kevin's behavior over the past few weeks. How he'd been quiet during the bachelor party. How he'd seemed distracted when we were going over his best man speech. I'd attributed it to wedding nerves or maybe work stress, but now I was seeing it in a completely different light. The guy had been feeling guilty about sleeping with my girlfriend while simultaneously preparing to stand next to me at the altar. And Amanda, all those late nights she'd explain away as wedding planning stress. All those times she'd seem distracted or distant. Every time I'd asked if everything was okay, and she'd given me that bright smile and told me she was just excited about becoming my wife. Every single reassurance had been a lie. I must have sat there for 2 hours, going through every photo multiple times, trying to find some explanation that didn't involve my entire life being built on deception. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe someone had photoshopped these images to mess with my head, but the quality was too good, the details too consistent. And frankly, who would go to that much trouble? The worst part was realizing how this had all happened by accident. Marcus must have forgotten to clear his memory card between sessions, and when he copied our engagement photos, he accidentally included Kevin and Amanda's secret session too. If he'd been more careful with his equipment management, I might have married Amanda without ever knowing the truth. I finally closed the laptop and just sat there in my kitchen, staring at the wall and trying to process what I discovered. In 48 hours, I was supposed to promise to love and honor someone who had been lying to my face for who knows how long. I was supposed to exchange vows with someone who was clearly in love with someone else. The USB drive felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. All those beautiful engagement photos that should have been happy memories were now tainted by what else was on that same piece of plastic. How was I supposed to look at pictures of Amanda smiling at me knowing what she'd been doing with Kevin just days later? That night, I didn't sleep at all. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, running through every possible way this could play out. I could confront them both privately, call off the wedding quietly, maybe try to salvage some dignity from the whole mess. Or I could do something else entirely, something that would make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of people they really were. The night before my wedding, I probably got about 30 minutes of actual sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos again. Amanda and Kevin looking at each other like they discovered fire, while I'd been running around like an idiot making sure our special day would be perfect. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a butter knife. Part of me kept thinking I should handle this like a mature adult. Call Amanda, sit her down, have one of those serious relationship conversations where everyone gets to explain their feelings and maybe we work through it somehow. Or I could quietly cancel everything, tell people there were some last-minute complications, and deal with the whole mess privately. But every time I started to reach for my phone to call her, something inside me just rebelled against the idea. Why should I make this easy for them? Why should I protect their reputations and spare their feelings when they clearly hadn't given a damn about mine? They'd made their choices, and those choices had consequences. Around 3 a.m, I made up my mind about something that was probably going to change everything forever. I wasn't going to handle this quietly or maturely, or with any kind of adult conversation. If Amanda and Kevin wanted to play games behind my back, we were going to finish this game in front of everyone we knew. Our church had this big projection screen they used for announcements and hymn lyrics during services. Perfect for displaying photos to a couple hundred people at once. I'd been planning to show a slideshow of our engagement pictures during the reception, but now I had a much better idea for those photos. I spent the rest of the night organizing Marcus's accidental gift into a presentation that would tell the story I wanted everyone to see. Nothing too graphic or inappropriate. I'm not a complete monster, but definitely clear enough that nobody would have any questions about what had been going on behind my back. The hardest part was acting normal the next morning. Amanda came over around 10 to start getting ready, bringing her bridesmaids and enough hair products to supply a small salon. She was practically glowing with excitement, talking about how perfect everything was going to be, how she couldn't wait to become Mrs. Johnson. Watch her get ready. Knowing what I knew was like some kind of psychological torture. She kept asking me if I was nervous, telling me how handsome I looked in my tuxedo, making all those sweet comments that would have melted my heart 24 hours earlier. Now they just felt like salt in an open wound. Kevin showed up around noon to help me with last-minute preparations and probably to make sure I wasn't having second thoughts. He kept making jokes about how I was about to become a married man, how my life of freedom was officially over, all that typical best man banner. That's supposed to be funny, but mostly just makes everyone nervous. The guy even had the nerve to give me this heartfelt speech about how happy he was for Amanda and me, how we were perfect for each other, how he'd never seen two people more meant to be together. I just nodded and smiled while internally planning his public humiliation in front of everyone we'd ever known. About an hour before the ceremony, I excused myself to go check on the audio-visual setup at the church. Told Kevin I want to make sure the slideshow would work properly, that I was nervous about the technical side of things. He offered come help, but I insisted I could handle it myself. The church's AV system was pretty straightforward. Just plug in a USB drive, and everything displays automatically on the big screen. I loaded my specially curated presentation and did a quick test to make sure everything would work when showtime arrived. The photos looked crystal clear, even from the back pews. I also had a backup plan, just in case something went wrong with the main system. I copied everything to my phone and brought a portable projector as insurance. There was no way this was going to fail because of technical difficulties. Walking back to the preparation room, I ran into Pastor Williams, who asked if I was ready for the big moment. I told him I'd never been more ready for anything in my life, which was probably the most honest thing I'd said to anyone all day. He seemed pleased that I was so confident and calm about everything. Amanda's mom cornered me in the hallway to tell me how beautiful her daughter looked and how proud she was to have me as a son-in-law. Kevin's parents were there too, talking about what a wonderful friendship Kevin and I had. How special it was that best friends could share such an important day together. Every conversation felt like another nail in the coffin of whatever my old life had been. These people had no idea they were about to witness the most dramatic wedding disaster in the history of our church, and I was the only one who knew what was coming. 30 minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start, I had one last moment of doubt. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe there was some explanation I hadn't considered. Maybe destroying everything publicly would make me the bad guy in the situation instead of the victim. But then I thought about all those photos again. The timestamps, the intimacy, the lies, the fact that both of them had looked me in the eye and pretended everything was normal while they were carrying on behind my back. My moment of doubt passed pretty quickly after that. I took one last look at myself in the bathroom mirror before heading into the sanctuary. The guy looking back at me wasn't the nervous, excited groom I'd expected to see. He was someone who'd been pushed too far and was about to push back twice as hard. Someone who decided that if his life was going to blow up anyway, he might as well control the explosion. The church was filling up with family and friends, everyone dressed in their Sunday best and ready to celebrate what they thought would be a beautiful union between two people who loved each other. Amanda was in the bride's room, probably putting finishing touches on her makeup and practicing her vows one last time. In about 20 minutes, she'd be walking down that aisle in her white dress, looking like every man's dream of the perfect bride. And about 5 minutes after that, everyone in that church would know exactly what kind of person they'd really been celebrating. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my jacket pocket, but I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. The church looked absolutely perfect when I walked down the aisle to take my position at the altar. Flowers everywhere, candles flickering, about 200 of our closest family and friends filling the pews with expectant smiles. Everyone was dressed up and ready to witness what they thought would be a beautiful celebration of love and commitment. Kevin was already standing next to me, fidgeting with his tie and making small talk about how nervous he was to give his best man speech later. The irony of him being nervous about a speech while I was about to detonate both of our lives was almost funny. Almost. Pastor Williams gave me an encouraging nod and asked if I was ready. I patted my jacket pocket where the USB drive was waiting and told him I'd never been more prepared for anything. The church's sound system was working perfectly. The projection screen was clearly visible from every seat, and I had the remote control that would change everything sitting right in my other pocket. The music started, and Amanda's bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle. Each one of them looked beautiful and happy, probably thinking about their own future weddings and how romantic this whole day was turning out to be. Amanda's sister caught my eye and gave me a little wave, mouthing something about how lucky Amanda was to have found me. Then the wedding march began, and everyone stood up as Amanda appeared at the back of the church. I have to admit, she looked absolutely stunning. Her dress was perfect. Her hair was perfect. Her smile was radiant as she walked toward me on her father's arm. For just a second, I almost forgot about everything I discovered and remembered why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. But then I caught sight of Kevin out of the corner of my eye, and reality came crashing back. He was watching Amanda walk down the aisle with this expression that wasn't quite appropriate for a best man. There was too much emotion there, too much personal investment in how beautiful she looked on what was supposed to be my wedding day. Amanda reached the altar, and her father lifted her veil to give her the traditional kiss before handing her off to me. She was glowing with happiness, whispering about how perfect everything looked, how she couldn't believe this day was finally here. I took her hands and tried to look like a man who was about to promise his life to the woman of his dreams. Pastor Williams began the ceremony with some words about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. He talked about how Eric and Amanda had found something special in each other, how their love was an inspiration to everyone who knew them. Several people in the congregation were already getting emotional, dabbing at their eyes with tissues. The pastor moved into traditional vows, asking Amanda if she promised to love, honor, and cherish me in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do us part. She looked directly into my eyes with what seemed like complete sincerity and said she absolutely did promise all those things. That's when I decided it was time. I pulled out the remote control and casually pressed a button that would activate the church's projection system. The big screen lit up behind us, and I heard a few people in the congregation make appreciative sounds, probably expecting to see some romantic photos or maybe our engagement pictures. Instead, the first image that appeared was Amanda and Kevin in Marcus's studio, holding hands and looking at each other like they'd discovered the secret to happiness. It took a few seconds for people to process what they were seeing, like when your brain needs a moment to catch up with something that doesn't make sense. The church went completely silent, not the reverent quiet you get during prayers, but the kind of absolute silence that happens when 200 people suddenly realize they're seeing something they definitely shouldn't be seeing. I heard Amanda gasp behind me, but I didn't turn around to look at her reaction. I clicked to the next photo. Kevin and Amanda on the studio couch, her head on his shoulder, both of them looking completely comfortable and intimate. Then another click. Amanda in that red dress I'd never seen before. Kevin's hands on her waist, both of them laughing about some private joke. People in the congregation started whispering, then talking. Then some of them were standing up to get a better look at the screen. I heard Kevin say something behind me, probably try to explain or deny what everyone was seeing, but his voice was drowned out by the growing commotion. Amanda grabbed my arm and started saying something about technical difficulties, about how this was what it looked like, about how someone must have hacked into the system or played some kind of cruel prank. But I just kept clicking through the photos, and everyone could see the timestamps in the corner of each image. 3 days before the wedding. That's what the date stamp said, and everyone in that church could do basic math. These photos had been taken while Amanda was supposedly busy with final wedding preparations, while Kevin was helping me with bachelor party planning and last-minute ceremony details. Pastor Williams was trying to figure out what was happening, looking between me and the screen like he couldn't quite believe what he was witnessing. Some of the older ladies in the congregation were covering their eyes, while others were pulling out their phones to take pictures of the pictures, because apparently even divine retribution needs to be documented for social media. The final photo I'd included was just text on a black background, taken 3 days before our wedding. Thanks for the memories, Marcus. Simple, clear, and impossible to misinterpret. I turned off the projection system and looked out at the congregation for the first time since this had all started. The expressions on people's faces ranged from shock to confusion to what might have been grudging admiration. Amanda's mother looked like she might faint, while my dad was shaking his head with what looked suspiciously like pride. Kevin had gone completely pale and was backing away from the altar like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Amanda was crying now, but not the happy tears you'd expect from a bride on her wedding day. These were the tears of someone whose entire world had just collapsed in front of everyone she'd ever cared about. She kept trying to say something, but no words were coming out that made any sense. I took off my boutonniere and handed it to Pastor Williams, who was still standing there looking like someone had just performed a magic trick he couldn't quite figure out. Then I walked down the aisle toward the back of the church, ignoring the chaos that was erupting behind me. People were calling my name, asking questions, trying to figure out what had just happened and what it all meant. But I didn't stop to explain or justify or answer anyone's concerns. I'd said everything I needed to say with that slideshow, and now it was time to leave before this turned into something even more dramatic than it already was. I walked out of that church and didn't look back once. Behind me, I could hear voices getting louder, people asking questions, chairs scraping against the floor as the congregation tried to figure out what they'd just witnessed. Someone was crying, probably Amanda, and someone else was trying to restore order, probably Pastor Williams doing his best to salvage what was left of a Sunday service. By the time I reached my car, about half the wedding party had followed me outside. My mom got to me first, and I expected her to be upset or disappointed or maybe even angry about the spectacle I just created. Instead, she hugged me tight and whispered that she was proud of me for not letting people treat me like a fool. My dad was right behind her, and he actually shook my hand like I had just accomplished something impressive. Coming from a guy who usually communicates through grunts and complaints about sports teams, that meant more to me than he probably realized. He said Amanda never deserved me anyway, which was probably the most emotional thing I'd heard him say in years. Kevin's parents looked mortified, apologizing for their son's behavior like they somehow could have prevented a grown man from making his own terrible decisions. Amanda's dad just stood there shaking his head, probably wondering how he was going to explain this to all the relatives who'd traveled from out of state for what they thought would be a celebration. I got in my car and drove away while people were still spilling out of the church, some of them clearly upset, others looking like they just witnessed the most entertaining thing that had happened in their lives in years. In my rearview mirror, I could see Amanda on the church steps, still in her wedding dress, surrounded by bridesmaids who were probably trying to figure out how to handle a crisis that wasn't covered in any wedding planning guide. The story spread faster than a grease fire in a restaurant kitchen. By Monday morning, everyone we knew had heard some version of what happened, and opinions were pretty evenly split. About half the people thought I was a genius who had handled an impossible situation with style and efficiency. The other half thought I was a vindictive maniac who had publicly humiliated two people who probably deserved a chance to explain themselves. Amanda tried calling me about 50 times over the next few days, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry to desperate to apologetic and back to angry again. Kevin did the same thing, trying to explain how it had all started innocently and gotten out of hand, how they'd tried to end things before the wedding but couldn't resist their feelings for each other. The divorce paperwork went through faster than anyone expected, mainly because Amanda didn't contest anything. She knew she didn't have much ground to stand on, and I think she just wanted the whole thing to be over as quickly and quietly as possible, which was ironic, considering how loudly it had all started to unwind. Work became interesting for a while, because my co-workers didn't know whether to bring up what happened or pretend everything was normal. Jake, the guy who'd originally recommended Marcus as our photographer, apologized so many times, I finally had to tell him to stop. He kept saying he felt responsible for the whole thing, like he could have somehow predicted that a photographer's mistake would expose my fiancé's affair. About 3 months later, I ran into Kevin at a gas station. It was awkward as hell, but we actually ended up talking for a few minutes while our cars were filling up. He looked terrible, like he hadn't been sleeping or eating properly, and he told me that things hadn't worked out between him and Amanda after everything went public. Apparently, when you start a relationship based on lies and betrayal, it turns out those same trust issues follow you into whatever comes next. Who would have thought? Kevin said they'd broken up about 6 weeks after my church presentation, and that Amanda had moved back in with her parents in Dallas. He seemed like he wanted me to feel sorry for him, but I was pretty much out of sympathy by that point. I started dating again about 8 months later, which felt weird at first because I'd been with Amanda for so long, I'd almost forgotten how to be single. But it was also liberating to meet people who didn't know anything about my dramatic church divorce story. Although in a city like Austin, word gets around pretty quickly about these kinds of things. The funny thing is, I actually got a few dates specifically because of what happened. Apparently, there's a whole subset of women who find the guy who publicly called out his cheating ex thing attractive. Not exactly the dating demographic I would have expected. But I wasn't complaining about having options. Marcus sent me a Christmas card that year with another apology for his role in everything. Poor guy probably thought he was going to lose business or get sued because of his memory card mistake. But honestly, it was the best accidental favor anyone ever did for me. He included a gift certificate for a free photo session, which was sweet, but also kind of hilarious under the circumstances. These days, I'm doing pretty well. I got promoted at the repair shop, partly because I threw myself into work for a while, and partly because my boss figured anyone who could plan and execute what I did at the church was probably management material. I bought a house closer to downtown, got a dog named Marcus as a tribute to the photographer who accidentally saved my life, and generally rebuilt everything in a way that feels more authentic. Sometimes people ask if I regret how I handled everything, if I wish I confronted Amanda and Kevin privately instead of making it a public spectacle. And honestly, I think about that question a lot. Would it have been more mature to handle things quietly? Probably. Would it have been more dignified? Maybe. But here's the thing. They made their choices knowing exactly what they were risking. They decided their feelings were more important than my trust, my friendship, and my future. And they were perfectly willing to let me live in ignorance for as long as possible. When you make those kind of choices, you don't really get control how the truth comes out. Plus, if I'd handled it privately, Amanda might have convinced me to try counseling, or Kevin might have talked me into forgiving him for the sake of our friendship. I might have spent years trying to rebuild something that was fundamentally broken from the start, always wondering if I could ever really trust either of them again. Instead, I ripped the Band-Aid off in one dramatic, public, unforgettable moment. Yeah, it was harsh, but it was also honest, and it made sure there was no going back, no second-guessing, no wondering what might have been. Sometimes the cleanest cut is the deepest one, and sometimes that's exactly what you need to heal properly and move on to something better. So that's my story. An accidental USB drive, a photographer's mistake, and one Sunday morning that changed everything. Would I do it again the same way? Absolutely. Do I sleep better at night, knowing I don't have to wonder what my partner is hiding from me? You bet. Sometimes the best revenge really is just the truth. Serve at exactly the right temperature in front of exactly the right audience. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole crazy story. I know it was a lot to process, and I really appreciate you taking the time to hear about probably the wildest chapter of my life so far. What do you think? Did I go too far with the church presentation, or was it exactly what the situation called for? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out and lets me know you want to hear more stories like this one. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.